What I want to do in this video is have a look at the cabinet, because in the last videos we've looked at the powers of the Prime Minister. Now in this video we want to look at the powers of the cabinet. So just as a little introduction, the traditional constitutional view is that executive power in the UK is invested in a cabinet whose members exercise collective responsibility. This is the traditional cabinet government view that we looked at in the last video. However, the importance of the cabinet has decreased slightly in the modern era. Okay, and so the real definition of the cabinet is just simply a meeting of senior ministers and heads of government departments. It is formally a key decision-making body in the British government. And just by reference, we're going to have a look at the current cabinet. So we have Boris Johnson MP, who is the Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury. So don't forget that the Prime Minister also sits in the cabinet, and he's the chair of the cabinet. Okay, we have the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sajid Javid. Okay, we have the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, who is Dominic Raab. We have Priti Patel, who is the Secretary of State for Home Department. Michael Gove is the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Matt Hancock is the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. Okay, and then we have probably and arguably the most important at the moment, Steve Barclay, who is Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. So, with regard to cabinet meetings, the frequency and length of cabinet meetings have fallen steadily since the 1950s. When it tended to meet twice per week, whereas under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and also under Cameron, the cabinet meetings were just once a week when Parliament is in session. Cabinet meetings under Blair tended to last about an hour, with some lasting around half an hour. The Prime Ministerial Code and the Cabinet Manual set out the role and functions of the Cabinet and its committees, acting as authoritative guides to the Cabinet system. So these are two different works that are seen as authoritative works. So if we think back to the Constitution video and we look at the sources of the Constitution, these are two sources of the Constitution. Okay, so the functions of the Cabinet are as follows: registering and ratifying decisions taken elsewhere in the Cabinet system, discussing and deciding on major issues, receiving reports on key developments and determining government business in Parliament, settling disputes between government departments. And so what we find here is the powers and the role of the cabinet are rather broad when it comes to what's written in the Ministerial Code and the Cabinet Manual, and so there's been scope for reform and sort of changing and taking away the role of the Cabinet a little bit more in the 20th century. Cabinet committees are also very important, okay, and this is where a considerable proportion of decision making occurs. Okay, these cabinet committees include ministerial standing committees, okay, and these are permanent for a Prime Minister's term of office. Ministerial subcommittees who report to the standing committees, and ad hoc committees, okay, temporary committees set up to deal with particular issues. And then finally we have official committees of civil servants. So with that being said, let's have a look at the inner cabinet. So Prime Ministers periodically hold meetings with smaller groups of ministers. In times of crisis, a select group of ministers may meet regularly to discuss developments and formulate policy. When this happens, a small group is said to be the, quote, inner cabinet. It can also be known as the kitchen cabinet, okay? And examples of inner cabinets include Harold Wilson creating a short-lived inner cabinet to deal with the sterling crisis, and more famously, during the coalition, the Quad was made up of Cameron, Clegg, Osborne and Alexander, okay, the four heads of the two parties in the coalition. The Cabinet Office also has a very important role. It was created in 1916 to provide support to the cabinet system. Okay, the key section is the Cabinet Secretariat, okay, which regulates and coordinates Cabinet business. It also is involved in the management and regulation of the civil service. And under Blair, the Cabinet Office took a leading role in policy delivery and public service reform. So when we look at the Cabinet, we see that the powers and the roles of the Cabinet are a little bit less defined than that of the Prime Minister, which does always lead people to suggest that the Cabinet is almost subordinate to the Prime Minister. And if you want to know about other theories of executive power, go and watch the last video. And in the next video, we're going to look a little bit deeper at the Cabinet by talking about the idea of ministerial responsibility.